The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
You've always got time for Short Time.
Hey, it's Warren Lopez.
David Taylor.
Brent Metcalf. Johnny Hendricks. Tony Ramos. Bubba J.
Mike Golick.
Matthew Modine. The one and only Chael Sonnen. And you are listening to the one and only Short Time Wrestling Podcast by the often imitated and never duplicated Jason Bryant.
Now up on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, we are going to talk to Josh Feldman. He is the Executive Director of Beat The Streets Lancaster, and that is Lancaster, Pennsylvania, town I know very well. I spent 3 years of my life living there, and Josh is going to talk to us about what he's doing with Beat The Streets Lancaster, and he's a Virginia Tech alum, so a lot of hokey wrestling news in the news, so to speak. But before we get to that, Josh, welcome to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast.
Thank you very much, Jason. I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking very much forward to it.
All right, first thing you had to understand when you moved to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Lancaster or Lancaster? You were corrected pretty quickly.
I was, and I spoke with Mike Rogers, who's the coach at F&M, and so I got the down low very quickly that it is not Lancaster, Lancaster. So we've got it. My wife still gets corrected a lot, but I'm trying to work with her on it.
And this is kind of tough for you since you're originally a Georgia boy, right?
I am. I went to high school in Georgia, only lived there for a few years in high school, then went to Virginia Tech, and then, coached actually at the University of Virginia for a couple of years. My brother went to school there. Then I went into the Navy and spent 20 years kind of traveling around with the Navy, got to wrestle with the Navy, and then retired this past year in 2016 from Virginia Beach, which is where, our paths crossed originally when I was there. And through some personal networks and interest in wrestling, this opportunity came available to try to start something in Central PA to help out the youth and wrestling participation in this area.
So when we look at situations with Beat the Streets, we see New York. Obviously, Mike Novogratz and that crew has really put the Beat the Streets program on the map, but we've also seen him pop up in Philadelphia, Baltimore. What made Lancaster County and the city of Lancaster prime for a Beat the Streets type of program?
Well, I don't know if prime is the right word, but certainly, you mentioned the three big ones that we and I spoke with. I did a site visit out to Beat the Streets Philly with Chris Hanlon, who's done a fantastic job out there. I spoke with Brendan Buckley just as he was taking over the job at New York, and I spoke with Yuri Washington out in Beat the Streets LA. And you're right. We're vastly different as far as our population, our demographics. But what Beat the Streets is about is giving opportunities to kids who wouldn't normally have those opportunities in poverty, and at-risk kids and underprivileged kids. They come in all shapes, forms, sizes. And here in Lancaster, besides the urban demographic, and again, we're based in Lancaster, but really we want to be a central Pennsylvania organization to include Harrisburg, York, and Lancaster counties, which are all right around each other. And there's quite a lot of at-risk, underprivileged kids in this area. And even though, Pennsylvania is a wrestling hotbed, what we've seen over the past years is a real decrease in participation at the youth level, and as well as an under-participation even of what's going on through those at-risk and minority groups. And we really wanted to target that.
And having lived there for 3 years, I can kind of understand what you're talking about, because the city of Lancaster itself, the city isn't that huge. I mean, that's probably about 50,000, but the county is extremely sprawling. And you talked about those socioeconomic, the diversity. You could have what people would assume a Beat the Streets program would serve. They assume inner city, but like you said, the poverty is different, because you've got farm kids who are poor, and then you've got inner city kids who are poor, and this county is kind of a hodgepodge of all of that. You've got it's a large Latino population as well too, so you've got a very different group of underserved kids. And what's that challenge been like to say, all right, how do we relate to the kid who lives in a row house with 6, 7 other people versus the kid who lives on the farm who's, been working on hand-me-downs for 15 years?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's we have, as we developed our long-term and short-term goals, we kind of whiteboarded it. Who are we trying to target? And obviously the first thing that we hit was the inner city populations, just because that's the I don't want to say the easiest problem to solve, but it was the highest return on our initial programs to reach the most kids. The big challenge for us there was the Latino population does not have a wrestling culture ingrained in it yet. So we're trying to promote that. We're trying to work within some of their localities where we go, whether it be churches, whether it be other youth organizations that are already working, and kind of partner with them to make them realize what these opportunities are. But it's funny because as we set up these programs, I literally had moms walk in with their young kids, turn around and see that it was not luchador wearing a mask coming off the top rope wrestling, and they turned around and walked out because it wasn't what they thought it was when they heard we were starting a wrestling organization. But we've been very well received. And so our challenge for them is just to continue the promotion, just to raise awareness, to get the participation, because we found once they're aware of it and they understand what we're trying to do for the kids with the academic and the mentoring and the life skills tutoring, as well as the wrestling opportunity, they're very grateful for that opportunity for their young boys and girls. And that's one of the big focuses we have. Now, on the other side of the coin, we have those, like I said, the geography of Lancaster County is huge. And so we have the populations that are so spread out. And that is a much more challenging target to hit because, when you talk your budgets, if we're having to travel to get those kids in, because it may be they only have one car and somebody works the night shift, or they don't have any cars because they actually live on the farm where they're working. Things like that are a very difficult thing for us to overcome. So one is budget with fundraising. The more the more resources we have, we can provide better opportunities to those kids. But what we've done now is we're trying to reach out to local existing brick and mortar solutions in the most rural parts of the community and establish programs there. But we're very aware that those programs may only get 10, 15, or 20 kids in them because the population density just isn't there. Where in Lancaster City, we had about 100, and I think now we have about 153 kids that have signed up through the program. Now, we're not consistently getting all of those every day, but at least that we're reaching that number, that they're aware of us and they've come in, they've had practices, and we're starting to build that consistency.
Now, for those unfamiliar with how the city of Lancaster works, when I moved there in 2005, Pat Tossi, who works with the NWCA, and Jeff Boyer, who used to work with the NWCA, and they're based in Manheim, about 8 miles kind of northwest of Lancaster. You got to look at, and this is not a joke about the Amish, you have to look at Lancaster as like a wagon wheel. It is in the center, and then all the roads spoke out of it, and then there's like an outer pike. So it's like a giant wagon wheel in terms of where you get everything. So the center of Lancaster is the downtown. It's the row houses. It's where Franklin and Marshall is. It's like old, sitting on the stoop type of living. I had a row house in Lancaster. Where do you guys set your home base up, and where these kids come and train? I mean, we're in the central part of the city is your location.
Our two main locations in the city are at the Lancaster Recreation Center, and then we also have an alternative school that we utilize the gymnasium. It's called Phoenix Academy. So as you're familiar, we have two roads that are the primary north-south entranceway into the city, and then we're to the east of on one of our facilities and to the west on the other. So the goal was to find two locations that were, really within the major low-income areas of the city, so that if kids needed to, they could walk there. They don't have a public transportation system in Lancaster, so that was another obstacle that we had to overcome to remove as many obstacles as possible and make it accessible to as many kids as possible right away in the city. And we think we've been fairly successful in that, especially with partnering with the Lancaster Recreation Commission, who has access to the different schools, so we're able to get in and work in the schools and promote and things like that within the schools.
Well, you say there's not public. Now, there is buses, but I'll tell you what. I had to take the bus one day to pick up my truck when it was getting serviced, and I tell you what, it's basically it's like not having public transportation. So you're probably closer to accurate, even though there are buses. Now, one thing that's also interesting about Lancaster County is for the high school league, the Lancaster Lebanon League is a pretty strong wrestling league within District 3. And those of you who know Pennsylvania know that District 3 is pretty powerful. Probably not every year District 11 Whitfield tough, but every year, there's a wave of kids that come through. But Lancaster City has really been kind of the hole in the LL and District 3. And what are you guys trying to do to work with, get these kids into the high school system? Because I remember when I lived there, JP McCaskey hadn't had a state qualifier in like forever. And they got one kid through, and it was like, oh my gosh, McCaskey's got a kid through. And McCaskey, for those who don't know, is the largest high school in the city. So how are you trying to funnel these kids into respective high school and middle school programs to get them rolling? And so it's not just like, oh, here's a one-off every 4 years. McCaskey gets a kid to the state tournament.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And we actually work very closely with McCaskey. Their athletic director is one of the members on our board. He was integral in bringing us to the area. And then their high school coach actually works as one of our youth coaches as well, Isaiah Rodriguez, and he's been fantastic. And one of the things is it's not exclusively McCaskey, where District 3 is doing well. Even the schools that were traditional powerhouses are seeing their participation drop. Solanco, some of the other schools. I know Lancaster Catholic is struggling. Peckway Valley this year had 6 kids on their high school team, and their youth organizations are dropping as well. So the pipelines are getting shallower and shallower, and there's a litany of reasons for that. And like you mentioned, the National Wrestling Coaches Association with Mike Moyer is right up there. So we work very closely with him on ways forward to increase participation. And that's one of the differences between us and Philly and New York, where those schools were interested primarily, their original initiative was to bring high school programs back that had been cut due to budget cuts. All of our schools around here have high school and junior high programs. The problem is, at some of the dual matches this year, there were 6 matches for a high school dual match, and the rest were forfeits just because of low participation numbers. So where our primary focus now is on the 1st to 8th graders to get them involved, to raise awareness, to remove obstacles, and get them into the sport so that we can build a steady, like you mentioned, a steady pipeline into those same high schools. And so we're taking kids from all over the county. We're working with Columbia Borough, which is out on the western side, just before you hit the river into York, for the exact same reason. They only had 6 or 7 kids on their high school team, but they were traditionally, if you look at the history books in District 3, Columbia in the 70s, 80s, and even really into the early 90s was a powerhouse school in the area. And we're trying to bring that back. So the interest is there in the wrestling, and the history is there in wrestling in District 3. We're just trying to raise awareness and bring these kids back to the sport and let them understand, the wonderful benefits that participating and competing in the sport of wrestling will give you, besides the athletic side, the determination, the self-confidence, all those kind of things that will make these kids better citizens when they graduate high school.
Getting out of the Navy, you were a high school coach in Virginia for a while at some schools that we know pretty well. Great Bridge is a name a lot of people will know about. Grassfield, which was a new school that kind of split the Great Bridge. Now, the Great Bridge machine has been split, I think, 3 times now, 2 or 3 times since the late 90s. But you coached down there. And what experiences did you take from your high school coaching once you got back into the sport full time that have really helped you despite it being a different area?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things you hear about as coaching. And you're exactly right. Great Bridge had that dynasty running, into the early 2000s. And then as the Chesapeake population grew, they built 2 more high schools in there, which kind of split it up. And it was a challenging situation. But people always talk about how kids are different and things like that. Kids really aren't different. It's just their motivation is different. They'll work just as hard and they'll commit to something if you find a way to get them interested in it. So that's the challenge. Is that's where they're different. Is finding that motivation for them. And that was one of the things that I'll be honest, I was not good at when I was at Great Bridge. I took that job. I was actually still active duty when I took that job. I was working with their youth club, and their high school coach left, and they were left in a lurch. And I said, hey, I don't want your kids to not have a coach, so I'll do it if you can't find anybody else. And then, looking back now, I did it for 2 years before I had to deploy again with the Navy. But I went into it unprepared to be a high school coach, so it was a lot of learning on the job. Thankfully I had some good assistant coaches that really helped to guide me. Like I said, the big thing was understanding that the motivations are different, and I tell you, they're even way more different here in Lancaster, working with younger kids who really don't know what they want to do and rely on their parents to do it. So one of the biggest things we're having to do now is to communicate with the parents and let the parents understand what the advantages are to get their kids committed to something, to teach them commitment that, hey, I'm supposed to show up every day to practice, and they rely on them for the rides or to get there, and to try to get them to instill those same qualities into their youth.
What's the response been like from the wrestling factions in Lancaster County? We got Franklin and Marshall, Millersville University's right down the road. You've got a really, really strong wrestling community. Again, like you said, the NWCA, Stan Ziemer and his group are up in Manheim. I mean, what's been the response to y'all's presence in Lancaster County?
It's been fantastic. We have been really welcomed. And that was one of the things we did, is we were coming up with this concept on how to bring Beat the Streets to this area. What we didn't want to do is to have the mentality, and the same thing with the coaches who have existing youth clubs. We didn't want to bring the mentality that we were competing with anybody. We didn't want to cannibalize the kids away from the other clubs and to just have another club. We didn't want to cannibalize fundraising so that we were taking it away from those businesses. We're trying to fundraise on a national level. We had a fundraiser this January with the U.S. Wrestling Foundation and USA Wrestling. So we're trying to draw from a different pot and really build the foundation. The Wrestlers in Business Network with Stan Ziemer is doing fantastic work, and we're working very closely with them. I'm actually was invited to be on the board of the Wrestlers in Business Network here, and we're really trying to rally a lot more support for that is one of the things we're expanding into York and Harrisburg. The NWCA with Mike Moyer, have spoken with him many, many times, and we work very closely. We actually have three universities at all different competition levels here within Lancaster. So you have Franklin and Marshall, which is a Division I school. And I know Mike Rogers well, and we work very closely with that group. I kind of equate F&M now to where Virginia Tech was back when I was going to school there. They're a Division I program, but they're challenged with scholarships and things like that. So their recruiting is a challenge. And so we're trying to, like I said, we want to help those kids out. And then we have Millersville as a Division II program, which is in Lancaster. And then we also have Thaddeus Stevens Tech, which competes, I'm going to say, at the JUCO level.
Yeah, they're a two-year school.
Yep, which is a technical school that has a wrestling team as well. And we actually have some kids from our McCaskey team that are going to be wrestling for Coach Steve Musetis is there, and they're going to be wrestling for Thaddeus Stevens next year. So we reached out. So all those schools, what we've done is we've, as we have assistant coaches, we run our programs. We want those kids who have committed to wrestling and succeeded in wrestling at all different levels, the JUCO, Division II, and Division III level, to be in the room influencing the young kids who are just starting out their journey with wrestling. So we have some that are volunteer. We have some that are more stable, reliable coaches, and we give them a small, coaching stipend to help us run our programs. They help with some marketing stuff. We're in the process of trying to develop an academic tutoring piece, so that what we can do, Millersville specifically has an education department, so that perhaps the long-term goal is to have that be, whether it could be either a work study or an intern type ship where they work as an academic tutor to some of our Beat the Streets high school kids, and actually can receive some credit for it.
When you took over this position, what is the overall goal of Beat the Streets Lancaster that may not necessarily be the exact same goal as, say, Beat the Streets New York or Philly or LA?
Yeah, and it's funny when you say take over the position, because we're creating it whole cloth now. We were, it was brand new, so we're kind of working on the fly. But the goal for us is to increase participation in Central PA, to get more young kids involved in the sport of wrestling, so they can reap the benefits of everything. Everybody who's wrestled looks back on it and says, "Man, it really changed my life. This wrestling coach." This person influenced who I became later, and we want to give that opportunity and those benefits to as many kids as possible, and that's really what we're looking for. Now, there's some other side benefits to that with starting high school programs and thinking like that, but for us is to turn as many young kids who are at risk and have some challenges in front of them, and try to give them an avenue to change their futures a little bit through the sport of wrestling, whether that be college, whether it be trade school, whether it just be graduating high school, and staying out of trouble. Everybody has different goals that they're going to achieve and different levels that they can achieve, but the sport of wrestling is going to help to increase those levels no matter what they are.
And one thing I think people also need to understand is that these Beat the Streets groups, they pop up all over the place. I know Sarah Levin, a friend of mine, has got started Wrestle Training Center in St. Louis. You know, we've got Uru out in L.A. They're connected, but the contributions need to go to the specific regions. Not it's not like, you know, we have the gala in New York City. That's not the entire Beat the Street. That's mainly for New York. I mean, how can they contribute to Beat the Streets Lancaster besides going to btslancaster.org?
Yeah, they obviously, btslancaster.org is our website, has a donate button on it. Through Facebook. Our Facebook has a donate that we've certified through Facebook for us. Or like I said, there's a contact us page, you know, and that'll come, you know, right now all the emails are coming to me and some people we have assisting us, and we'll get back to you and we'll figure out a way to make those donations. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Each one is, for lack of a better word, an independent franchise that they've done. Now, I think either Beat the Streets New York or USA Wrestling has just hired somebody to kind of tie them all together as far as standards and practices to make sure if you're using the Beat the Streets name that you're doing it in the right way, and the programs that you're putting on want to represent that Beat the Streets name the best way possible. But yeah, each organization is independent. Their fundraising, their budgets, and everything like that are all independent.
Now, shifting gears a little bit about yourself, you had mentioned that you're from Georgia Wrestler, Virginia Tech. People see Virginia Tech now, and they see the All-Americans that Coach Dresser had helped develop before him, Coach Morlam, and now Tony Roby has the reins. But interesting factoid, folks, Josh Feldman, who is on our show with us right now, was only the second All-American in school history in the sport of wrestling, and that was in 1994. What was it like to know that there was like a 40-year gap between All-Americans? You were that guy. You finished 7th at heavyweight in 1994 and wrestled for a guy named Jerry Cheney, who, as you were telling me prior to us getting started here, quite a character. I mean, what was it like wrestling in Blacksburg in those days?
Yeah, it was. It's funny because I'll be working with Tony at the 30-man camp now this summer. We bring some kids down, and you see the facilities and the partners they have and the workout stuff they have in the room. And when it was fun, when I went on my recruiting trip there, and again, coming out of Georgia, I wasn't recruited, so I created my own VHS highlight reel and mailed it out to all the schools that were within about a 400-mile radius of Atlanta, Georgia. So I had the 3 North Carolina schools at the time, Clemson, and then Virginia Tech. And I think Virginia Tech and Clemson were the only ones who called me back. And I liked Virginia Tech a little bit better at the time, and I love it. But so I went up on the recruiting trip, and they showed us in the wrestling room. We shared, first of all, the coach, Jerry Cheney, at one point was the golf coach, the soccer coach, and the wrestling coach. When I got there, he had cut back on his duties, so he was only the soccer coach and the wrestling coach at the same time. We shared a locker room with the soccer team. They got it in the fall, and then they moved out after their season ends, and we moved in the winter, and then we kind of made do in the spring with whoever could hold on to the locker longest. The wrestling room was in the basement. It was right next to the industrial laundry where they washed all the uniforms and all that kind of stuff. So it was perpetually 100-some degrees down there. I remember there was a giant pole in the room, and the ceiling was maybe 8 feet high. So, if you were getting aggressive on some of your takedowns, you'd be smashing fluorescent lights and things like that walking around. It was a challenging room to train in. And, we had, the kids that we were recruiting there, I was a state place winner in Virginia. I was, I qualified for states in New Jersey. Those were the kids we were bringing in, but they just loved wrestling, and we all worked hard, and we made the best of it. I remember, I didn't have workout partners. I had our 190-pounder, my third, fourth, and fifth year was the 190-pounder. We didn't have any other heavyweights. We'd bring them in, and a kid would walk on, and then he would quit halfway through. We'd bring in some football players to push around, and they'd be like, I don't. This is too challenging, and they would leave. So it was a much different animal back then.
Yeah, and that was also the era where Virginia Tech football wasn't the monster that it was. It was just starting to get through. I mean, there were teams like with Will Fuhrer, coming through. I remember those teams, and then they started to get good, the mid to late 90s. And as an alum, what's it mean to? Oh, by the way, coincidentally, Jerry Cheney is still the coordinator of men's soccer operations at Virginia Tech to this day. And he stopped coaching wrestling in 1995. But what's it mean to look at your alma mater and be like, man, the entire athletics program went from a regional notable notably regional team, and I'm growing up in Virginia, it's Virginia and Virginia Tech, and to a lesser extent, then you get your James Madisons, your Old Dominions, your VMIs, your Liberties, but it's now a national name. Virginia Tech's a national name, and more than just football.
Well, yeah, and let's be honest. You have to give the credit to football for doing that. I got there in '89. Frank Beamer was hired in '87, and I'll say that it was called the Collegiate Times, was the school newspaper, was clamoring for Beamer to get fired, that he was a terrible coach, probably up till '91 or '92, and those were when we were losing, to East Carolina, to Akron. They were, the stadium was maybe a third full at the games. And they were just saying he's not right for the team. We got to fire him. And then I think it was '93. They went to the Independence Bowl, '93 or '94, and I can't remember even if they won or not. But that was the first bowl game they had gone to in probably 6 or 7, 8 years. And then they went on their run where they've gone to one every year since. So once that hit about '93 or '94, then that started the train moving for all their athletics.
You know what? You're good, man. It was the '93 Independence Bowl. I'm doing a little Wikipedia action right now. Beat Indiana in Shreveport. I think back then it might have been the Poulon Weed Eater Independence Bowl, I believe is the name of.
That's way beyond me, but I remember that because that was the big deal. So then, because I qualified for the NCAA tournament in '92, '93, and '94, and I was, it was getting a lot of publicity that someone was going to the national tournament. That any athlete from Virginia Tech had qualified for that because nobody was. And then we went to a bowl game in '93, and I think there was a track All-American. A thrower in around that same time. And so we were really getting a lot of publicity within the Collegiate Times newspaper because we were doing the best that Virginia Tech sports had done, because like you said, it was really just kind of a regional program at that point. And so then Coach Schnee retired in '95 or '96, and they hired Keith Morlam, who had a more of a resume of wrestling. And so he took over the wrestling program. He was an Iowa guy. And they started to get some recruits, and they started to build up a little bit there. And then football kept building. And then right around 2000 was obviously that was, the Michael Vick time with the national title game. And then also that was when Moreland left. And that was when the athletic department said, hey, we're going to fund this. We're going to go whole hog. And they hired Brands. That was when they really the whole program, they said, hey, we're going to commit to it. We're going to increase the funding. And I'm not privy to the contract details, but I'm sure Brands came in and said, if you're going to hire me, I need a facility and I need full scholarships. And they gave it to him. And then when he left, that was when we all thought the program was probably going to get cut. And what I've heard was that the program was going to get cut, but they were too far into the development of the facility at that point that they couldn't. They're like, well, we already spent all this money on the facility. It's already underway, all the planning and all that kind of stuff. So it would cost us more money to cut the program than it would just to keep it, since we've already invested so much in the facility. Kevin Dresser came in and said, hey, I want this opportunity. I'll take it and I'll salvage it. And man, did he. He really did a great job. And it's, looking back on it, it's been a great ride for him.
Yeah, we look at the number of All-Americans now. It's 32. There's 32 All-Americans. You were the second. So since 2000, you've seen your alma mater put 30 more wrestlers on these podiums, and then the news comes out that Coach Dresser leaves to go to Iowa State. What's your opinion on the whole situation on this type of opportunity, and what basically, where's your line in the sand on all this?
I'll be honest, I was surprised that he took the job just because he had put so much effort. When he showed up at Virginia Tech, I think, and he talked about it, I'm going to say they finished 77th out of 77 teams at the NCAA tournament his first year. And he took them from there to fourth in a decade. And so the amount of work and commitment and time and love it took to do that with he and Tony Roby, I was shocked that he didn't want to reap some of the benefits of that finish, where all of a sudden it's not easy to recruit, but it becomes much easier to recruit, where you can say, hey, we're a top 4 program, and to kind of reap those benefits. Instead, he jumped straight over to Iowa State. Now, I understand, obviously, there was a big contract involved and going back home and things like that. But still, my mentality would be, I want to take some of the benefits of all the hard work we put in. But I think Virginia Tech got a great one with Tony Roby, and I think they made the right decision, promoting Tony. He's been there. He and Dresser did it hand in hand, and so I think he's the right one to continue the trajectory for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and the news as we record this is they've also brought on Frank Molinaro officially. I think the Jared Frayer announcement, not yet official, but it has been reported that Frayer is going to join the staff too. So Ty Walls will stay on as a volunteer assistant. So as a heavyweight, you've got to like that scenario.
Yeah, it's the news broke first that St. John and Zadok and all those guys were going to Iowa State, and I was reading it earlier in the week, and I was like, oh man, I wonder what Tony's doing, who is he going to get, and man, he didn't miss a beat. I'm curious if they knew in advance, if Kevin had said, hey, I'm taking these guys, and they had started that, because to come out that quickly and get guys on that level of Molinaro and Frayer, and obviously Waltz had said for a while that he was going to stay at the RTC, so I think that was a given. But to pull guys like that with those kind of resumes is fantastic for Virginia Tech, and I think it does a lot to show that the program is going to continue on the same direction as it has been.
All right, I got to hear some Shanae stories though, because I don't know the man, and I know everybody that I know that's ever, Mike McCormick is an official from Pocosa, my hometown. He used to tell stories about officiating matches with Virginia Tech and Coach Shanae in the corner. I mean, there's got to be some characterization stories that you can kind of give us a little tease of to know what type of guy you were wrestling for in college.
Yeah, again, it was the most telling thing about Coach Day. One, I went to school there, so and I knew that he was the soccer coach and the wrestling coach, so we knew that it was not, a hardcore, program that we were getting into. We went there because we liked to wrestle, and Shanae was a great guy and one of those type of coaches that just really was a fun guy to be around. But yeah, he was an interesting character, and the biggest thing was, he was a little bit older. I think he was an All-American at Kansas State.
Yep, K-State.
Kansas State had wrestling, and I'm going to say in maybe the 60s. I can't remember what year he was an All-American. So he was around for all, but he had known, like Dale Barr, who was at Michigan. I think the two of them were either teammates or friends or something. But yeah, I mean, there was no unique specific stories to him. It was just his personality is, he'd be running around, like he'd have the Virginia Tech guys, we would be working the sideline, at soccer games and things like that in the fall. Our off-season training was, we'd go out there and he'd kind of give us a soccer ball and tell us to run around out there, while he was coaching the soccer practice and, things like that. So I certainly don't want to make it seem like a negative thing, because he was, it was a great time. And I think it was what a lot of us needed. And I'll be honest, if I had somehow, had the gumption to say, hey, I'm great, I'm going to go walk on to, an Iowa or Minnesota, one of those top programs, then I probably wouldn't have made it through a year of wrestling. They would have been so much more intense that I was ready for coming out of a Georgia, high school room, to walk into that. But, when I walked into Virginia Tech, I felt like, hey, yeah, I need to work to belong here. And I did. And it worked out very, very well for me.
Yeah, I'm just curious, too. One, Jerry Shanae was All-American Kansas State 1966. And two, who was the best soccer player on the wrestling team?
It was funny because I'm not sure we actually ever finished a soccer game, because what would end up happening is it would degenerate into some sort of fight as we were playing, because we had no idea of the rules. I remember we did have a couple of guys that were just much better natural athletes than others. There was a kid, Matt Burlingame, who was a 150-pounder, and I swear I'm not sure if he ever saw a soccer ball. He was from rural Pennsylvania, and I'm not sure if he ever saw a soccer ball before, but he could play it actually fairly well and picked it up. We had a kid from New Jersey, Bill Aschenbach, who was our 118 pounder, who was absolutely, he could wrestle and he would get in there and scrap with anybody on the wrestling mat, but absolutely could not play any other sport that was going on. Like we would play softball and he like slow pitch softball and he'd be striking out. We'd play basketball, and he would just be running and just brick it up, every single time. And it was hilarious to try to watch him to attempt to do any other sport besides wresling.
So he would have fit in well with the Gonzaga North Carolina State second half of the championship game.
Probably. And of course now, I make fun of him now, but we still maintain contact. He's did a PhD and a postdoc at Harvard and is working for a biotech company, making sure that, designing all the experiments to make sure that drugs do what the drug companies say they are. So he must be doing something right, even if it wasn't playing basketball or soccer.
Yeah, I wonder how many failed basketball players end up on a wrestling mat. I'm going to raise my hand here too.
I'll be honest. That's one of the things we're trying to promote in this area because basketball is huge, and we're trying to say, hey, youth basketball coaches, give us one day a week and tell your kids to come do wrestling practice because for instance, the McCaskey basketball team here in Lancaster has like 100 kids try out, and they cut them down to 20 kids, and those 80 other kids are just sitting in a parking lot or going out, whatever, doing nothing for those months. And we're saying, man, if we could just get 10% of those kids to show back up to to a wrestling mat, that would, increase the numbers for us each year. So we're working with youth football and youth basketball to really try to, to say, hey, we should be doing other sports for these young kids. So if they do fail at it, maybe they have something else they can fall back on.
What's something that your military background has brought to coaching and dealing with underprivileged youth?
One, the military has a huge diversity, of personnel. So, there's a lot of English as a second language families, a lot of, mixed race, things like that is not unusual, for me after coming, 20 years, with the military. The other thing, as far as actually running the program is the organization. I mean, military is very, checklist heavy. Hey, this is the procedure. This is how we're doing things. And that level of organization is critical as we're trying to start this up. If we just went in and we're haphazardly throwing together programs, the parents, the kids would see that and they wouldn't want to be involved. Our goal was when we started these programs and as we continue to expand them, we want it to be a professional organization where if we tell them there's going to be a practice, the lights are going to be on, the mats are going to be set up, and we're going to have coaches there. I've been a participant and with organizations in other youth sports where you didn't get the email that practice was canceled. Oh, sorry, and you're sitting there, and we don't want that at all. We want if we tell you to be there, we're updating things in real time and making sure that this is a professional organization these kids are a part of. So when they think back on wrestling, they have good memories of it and it has a good positive influence on them.
Sticking with the military theme, why did you join the Navy?
That was kind of a lark, really. And it worked out very well for me. Nobody in my family was in the military. I think it was probably Top Gun, an officer and a gentleman was about it. And I was coaching at the University of Virginia. One of the volunteer coaches there who was getting his master's degree had wrestled at the Naval Academy, had done his 5 years commitment and gotten out and was at the University of Virginia. So while we were hanging out, a friend of his drove over from Oceana Naval Air Station. He was an F-14 pilot, and we went out. And we were just kind of hanging out over the weekend, and they were telling stories, and I kind of was like, man, that sounds awesome. I gotta look into that. And I called whatever 1-800-GO-NAVY or whatever the Navy recruiting thing was, and they you had to take a standardized test, et cetera, and you filled out the application for officer candidate school, and at the time, which was unbeknownst to me, that was coming after the reduction in force that the Clinton administration had put through. And so they needed some extra bodies. They said, hey, we cut too much. We need to add some people. So when I applied, they were looking to expand the Navy anyway. And I got accepted to flight school and, did well, met the physical requirements and did well enough and, had a not a stellar career, but I had a very successful career and enjoyed it and got to do a lot of fun, exciting things.
All right, size requirements. You're a college heavyweight. Navy, you typically look at it as you're on boats. I mean, size has got to be an issue here. I mean, so when you went in, what type of career path were you looking at? And flight school obviously is flying jets, man. That's got to be a rush.
Well, yeah, and I let me correct you. They're ships, not boats.
Yes, my bad.
Anybody who's in the
I should know
there.
this. I should know this because I grew up right with Langley Air Force Base, Norfolk Naval Base, Fort Eustis. I should know this. So excuse me, I'm on a ship.
I
just won't call you a squid. How about that?
Oh, that's a deal.
Not too late.
So I was weighing about 245 when I finished competition, and again, this is before the internet, so you couldn't find out what the requirements were. So I went and I said, hey, I want to go to flight school. And they said, okay. So I went and I did all the physical requirements, and I was weighing about 245. And they said, hey, you passed all the physical requirements, but our max, our max weight for flight school to be a pilot is 235 pounds. That's the max the ejection seats can safely hold. And I was like, really? Oh, okay. Well, and then they called me like 2 or 3 days after I had done everything, because I guess nobody noticed that at the time when I was weighing in, or they didn't know the requirement. So I said, I think I'm, I think it's close to that, whatever, let me come back in. And they said, okay. And so being, a wrestler and being a heavyweight, I put the plastics on. I asked my buddy, hey, how can I cut weight? So I cut the 10 pounds. I went it back to the office. I weighed in at like 234.5. And they're like, yep, okay, you're good. You're under the limit. So you're good to go. And then I went out and, drank some Gatorade and had a meal right after that. And so, once you hit the limit, then they kind of didn't do it again until, each year for your flight physical. But once you were in, then they would just say, oh, you're not flying a plane that has ejection seats, so we don't have to worry about it. But when you're first starting out, they want to make sure you're good to do anything they ask you to. And then I ended up flying the P3 Orion, which is a surveillance. At the time, we were looking for submarines. Now it's transitioned a little bit more to surveillance. So it was like a larger plane. It was an old airliner back in the 50s, and the Navy bought the models and things like that. It's about the size of a 737. So it wasn't nearly as exciting as the jets, but it was a lot more comfortable to sit in, and we had a coffee maker in the back, so it was a lot more fun.
Yeah. So when you talk about being deployed, where are some places that you've had the opportunity to travel because of your naval career?
The first deployment I did was over to Sigonella, Sicily. So right in, right on the boot that's getting kicked by Italy. So we went all over Italy and we flew all over the Mediterranean. I was down in Puerto Rico doing some counter drug ops in El Salvador. We were in Iceland before they closed that base. We were flying, North Atlantic looking for Russian submarines and things like that. I was on an aircraft carrier, so I didn't spend any time specifically in Iraq or Afghanistan, but we were in the Persian Gulf, doing a lot of that conflict. I did do a tour with the Riverine unit in Kuwait, doing some harbor and security patrol. I got to, one of the neatest things I do is to finish up my career. I got selected to go over to Singapore, to live over in Singapore for about 6 or 7 months and do some work with embassies and other countries over there to develop some training plans. So that was neat living over there. So I really, with the exception of, I think Antarctica, and I never made it to Australia. I really wanted to get to Australia. I was supposed to go on a port call, but it got canceled. Those are about the only 2 continents I haven't been to.
Yeah, I think you're in the 99.99% of the world that hasn't been to Antarctica. So I wouldn't stress that one too much.
I made it up to the Arctic Circle. I got that certificate. We flew over to Arctic Circle when we were in Iceland. So I got that check in the box. I just didn't make it the other direction.
Oh, so you get, when you fly over, so there's certain, you get what? You said certificates.
Yeah, the Navy has little traditions. Like when you cross the international date line, when you cross the equator. I think the Arctic Circle, I think, is called the Blue Nose. Then there's I'm gonna get razzed for this, for not remembering. I can't remember what it's called when you cross the equator, but there's a shellback. There's a big shellback ceremony where it's not hazing, but it's they used to be hazing, but then the now politically correct Navy, it is not hazing. It's just a fun party that involves you getting hosed down and things like that. When you cross the equator for the first time, and so there's a whole bunch of little traditions that are through there depending on where you go. So it was a lot of fun.
All right, and when you see a bumper sticker that says "I love jet noise," what does that mean to you?
That means they either lived in San Diego or they lived in Oceana or Virginia Beach, Virginia, one of the two. But I can't make too much fun because I've got my Fly Navy license plate bracket on there.
Yeah, my sister lived right off of First Colonial, so the I love jet noise, that was definitely a spot when I would go back home. I was like, oh, this is what everybody's been talking about, because when you live next to Langley, you don't really hear it because you're a couple miles off. You're not right in the flight path of the F-14s.
Yeah, it's right. It is, man. It is loud. I tell you, it's funny though. Now they're all F-18s. They've retired the F-14. The loudest was the E-6, the Prowlers up in Whidbey Island. We were up there. Those were the loudest jets. And oh goodness gracious, those guys out. Because that's. Yeah, there's a Navy base up there, but it's not, Virginia Beach and San Diego are kind of ingrained with the Navy. But you get up to like Anacortes, Washington, and you get a lot of folks that just are, hey, I just want to retire to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, and then they have a Prowler screaming over their head, and they're not terribly happy about it.
I'll have to ask Coit Cooper about that because he's from Anacortes. Now, we're talking about the Navy, and I'm curious on, the military always tends to really, I know the Marine Corps is really big on recruiting wrestlers. And how many wrestlers did you come across in your day-to-day life within the Navy?
Quite a few. You're absolutely right. I tell you, the biggest one, and we actually work with them for some of our Beat the Street stuff. The U.S. Marine Corps sponsored one of our fundraising events, and we're working very closely with them. The Navy Special Forces, the SEAL team and SWCC units actively recruit at military or at wrestling events because they found there's a very high correlation or a higher correlation between wrestlers and those who make it through BUDS. So a lot. Once I was on the Little Creek base where I was for about the last 5 years of my career, and so that's a big SEAL base as well. There were quite a few. Scott Justice, who wrestled at Virginia Tech, was out there, and there's a few others. Gentleman who was a national champ at American, and I can't remember his name. Josh Glenn is out in Virginia Beach as well. So we've run into a few, and so we ran. Like the all-Navy wrestling team would have tryouts at Little Creek, and these guys would just come out, just kind of watch the events and things like that. So there is, and that's one of the things that we pushed our Beat the Streets kids. We have a lot of public service. We work closely with the Police Athletic League. We have some military recruiters that come and help us coach and things like that. So and work with the fire department as well. So these kids see all of these wonderful job opportunities and these people who they look up to in their communities that all have a wrestling background, and that ties them together. We want them to kind of get into that community. That's definitely a big aspect of how we're promoting our Beat the Streets program to youth.
Loving how you're tying all that together, and I'm also loving the fact you brought up Scott Justice. You can talk about one of the great guys on this planet. I mean, I don't think there's very few people I've met that are a better human being than Scott Justice. So glad you had a chance to mention him with everything that's going on. So Josh, again, as we wrap up, btslancaster.org. Any final thoughts before we get to our fun part of the show?
No, I think, like I said, we're doing great. One of our long-term, we didn't have a chance to talk about it. One of our long-term goals with Beat the Streets, and we're working with the National Wrestling Coaches Association, Wrestlers and Business Network, is to really lobby the PIAA for sanctioning women's wrestling. We've spoken to them about what the requirements are. So that's one of our upcoming high priority things that we are really pushing to get schools and to get girls involved. We actually, Beat the Streets Lancaster is running a girls only clinic the month of April. And so it's only for girls. We have some girl coaches. We have some other coaches as well, but we're trying to build those populations up, but that's going to be a semi-annual thing for that. So that's, we're going to try to run one in the fall, one in the spring every year, really pushing women's wrestling, because we think that's a huge thing for young girls' personal development as well as the sport of wrestling development.
All right, now comes the short time segment. I'm going to throw 10 questions at you in 90 seconds. You ready for the challenge?
I'll do my best, and hopefully it won't get too offensive.
Well, I kind of like offensive. I'm not. I'm sure the listeners do too. But anyway.
All right.
3, 2, 1, 0.
All right. Now, question 1: favorite person to follow on Twitter?
I like both the Virginia Tech and the UVA Twitter pages are fun to watch. Hopefully Tony will keep that going well.
Question 2: you win the Olympic gold medal. What are you having for dinner?
I'm a steak guy. I'm going to get the biggest steak I can find.
Somewhat related. Question 3. What was your favorite food spot in Blacksburg?
Oh, when I take the family up there, we always go to McAdoo's for the sandwiches. But
Absolutely, that's one.
I always liked Mike's Grill right on the corner there. It was right next to a laundromat when I was there. I thought they had the best burgers.
Yeah, I don't know. My Hokie fans can maybe correct me on this. I heard that might be closing. I'm not sure. I don't know if I heard that wrong or not, but I remember going there and having a greasy burger with Mike Akers and Justice at one point. All right, question 4. All-time favorite flavor of Gatorade?
It's funny. I actually lived in Gainesville, Florida when they invented Gatorade when it was just orange and green. So I'm going to have to go with orange.
All right. Favorite video game of all time?
I was not much. I'll say Halo. I played it a lot on the aircraft carrier on those deployments.
Imagine that, a bunch of military guys playing Halo.
Man, it burned a lot of time for us in that gray box on the ocean.
It's not a boat, though. Favorite international wrestler?
Oh, man. You got to go with probably Bella Glasso. I'm old.
Now, as a heavyweight, I realize this next question might be a bit of a stretch, but what move would you rather have in your arsenal, the John Smith low single or the Jordan Burroughs reshot double?
As a heavyweight, you got to go with the double leg.
Who is one guy from history you'd like to wrestle?
I was pretty lucky. If you look back over who I wrestled, actually, I'll say Kerry McCoy, because I actually wrestled Kurt Angle, I wrestled Rulon Gardner, I wrestled Tommy Thompson. I didn't wrestle Stephen Neal. Maybe either McCoy or Stephen Neal. They were both around the same time as me, and I just for whatever reason it didn't work out for me to get to wrestling. Who
is your funniest teammate?
I would say Bob Herman was the funniest, but I don't think he intended to be. He just made us laugh by the ridiculous stuff he said.
All right, question 10. What's your favorite food spot in Lancaster?
Favorite food spot in Lancaster. Oh, man, now you're putting me on the spot. I'll say Fireside Tavern. We've had some good steaks there, and they really do a lot of hosting for events. So it's I think it's called Dave and Steve's Fireside Tavern.
Yeah, I'm going to have to Google that one because I don't remember that when I was living there.
It's a little south. It's in Strasburg area, so it's a little out. It's closer to Quarryville.
All right, let's see. I'm going to do some Googling on that. You're out of the hot seat now, but I'm curious. Next time I get to Lancaster, because let's see, Fireside Tavern. Oh, okay, yeah, I know. Yep, off 896. I know exactly where it is.
And it's actually the person who owns it, his son, Thomas Haynes, wrestles at Lock Haven now. And so he went to Solanco. But so they do a lot of stuff. I had a cheesesteak there the other day, and it was fantastic. It was like Monday night was cheesesteak night. It was good.
Well, and thing is, you didn't say Philly either. You said cheesesteak, which you're adapting to Pennsylvania rather nicely if that's the case. So yeah, Josh Feldman, thank you for taking the time out. Excited to see what you're going to do and continue doing with Beat the Streets Lancaster. Again, those interested who live in the Lancaster County area or have roots by the crick, as they would say up there, btslancaster.org. And Josh, any other things if you want to throw out there about the organization as people that want to get involved, how do they do that?
No, like I said, the website and Facebook is the easiest way to get in touch with us. We'll find a way for you to help out. We're expanding up to Harrisburg, I think, for the 17, 18 years. So if you're living in central Pennsylvania, there's a way for you to get involved and help build the sport of wrestling. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll find a way to help you get involved.
And Josh Feldman, just it's one of those things when you talk to people and you feel like you could talk wrestling for hours. Yeah, this show could have probably gone on for hours just to go off on the different tangents that we were doing before the call and just after the call. So Josh Feldman, like what he's doing up in place I know fairly well. I spent 3 years of my life in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was a very eye-opening experience. And I'll say this from my adulthood in the world of adulting, that was the first place I ever lived on my own outside of college. So when I graduated from Old Dominion, I went and worked at the newspaper. And during that time, I moved in with my dad for a little bit, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life and what I could do on a salary at the newspaper, making $28,000 a year in 2004. So I decided to move to Pennsylvania when the NWCA offered me a position with Intermat, and Lancaster was one of the best times of my life. So I really enjoyed my 3 years there. The people I still talk to, I've been gone almost, I left in 2008, so I've been gone almost 9 years, but there's still people that I get to go back and check out the smoky haunts and things of that nature. And just, in the days before all the cord cutting, we'd go up to the Brickyard and some friends, we'd go watch Big Ten Network. One day I remember Tammy Tedesco, Mike Catullo, and I. Mike Catullo is now the assistant at Maryland, and Tammy used to work with the NWCA. Mike was then the assistant coach at Franklin Marshall, and we'd go up, and it was a Sunday. We were watching Big Ten wrestling during the NFC Championship game, and we're at a place called the Brickyard. 88 TVs in this place. 87 were on football. Our booth, we mainly changed it. We were the only place watching wrestling. So that was the year. It was the Packers and the Giants in the NFC Championship game too. So I remember that Lancaster is a fun spot. A lot of wrestling tradition there, as Josh mentioned. Stan Ziemer right up the road in Mannheim, and he was the women's team leader during the 2012 Olympic cycle. I want to make sure I got that right, or was it went to Baku, and I believe Stan was the team leader for the 12 cycle. So glad to see things getting rolling up in my former haunts of Lancaster. The wagon wheel can't go anywhere without an Amish reference. We didn't actually get an Amish reference into the show, but I'm really excited to see what he does, because the Beat the Streets programs, as we said, Sarah Levin's been on the show talking about her Beat the Streets program in St. Louis. We've got them popping up everywhere. I know Lydell Henry's getting work done in Maryland, Uru Washington, and L.A. It's just been quality stuff overall. So that being said, the Beat the Streets Gala for the New York side of things coming up May 17th. You might have seen that Japan is coming in to wrestle the United States. Logan Stieber was one of the first American athletes to announce that he's going to be wrestling that. And of course, Logan Stieber, world champion during the non-Olympic Worlds, and at 61 kilos. So excited to see Logie Bear out there. I'm still looking at flights to see if I can figure this out, because right now, looking for airline flights, you're probably going to snub United, right? I was United Gold for a while when I lived in Colorado, and I'll say this, it was nice to have the status, but you know what, since we moved back to Minnesota, MSP is a Delta hub, so I'm approaching silver status there, but looking to see if I can get a flight into New York to cover the match, get some interviews while I'm out there, and turn around and fly back either late on the red eye or that morning, and try to stay up and catch the an Uber or cab back to LaGuardia or JFK, or even over to Newark if I need to, because I'm trying to avoid the Manhattan hotel prices, if you know what I'm talking about. So looking to get out there May the 17th. Check that out. TheMat.com's got all the information there. Other things to talk about as it relates to this network. I want to thank everybody who has been contributing over the last couple years to the Matt Talk Podcast Network, creating fresh, engaging, and innovative wrestling content for you, the wrestling fan. This is a series and network of shows that provides on-demand audio. You can listen to this whenever you want. It's time shifted. It's just like cord cutting. Last night I missed Better Call Saul season 3 premiere. I'm going to find a way to watch that as I release this on April 11th, 2017, in the year of our wrestling. As we go, I'm trying to watch that. And now with these podcasts, you can listen to them whenever you want. You subscribe to them via iTunes, and you can do that very easily by going to matttalkonline.com/get-short-time to listen to this particular program. Go to matttalkonline.com and see all of the shows. There are 16 active programs on the network, and there are 3 archive shows. And some of them, I have to admit, the content is probably pretty good, but the audio quality is really pretty bad. So if you go back and listen to some of the old Wrestling 411 shows that Kyle Klingman and I did from 2008, 2009, that season, we did about 150, actually, I think it was 145 episodes during that year, which we were trying to get the Sports Center of Wrestling up and running. And, that format or that project didn't end very well, but it did give me the jump into podcasting. I'm coming up on my 9th year. This is the 9th year that I've been putting out on-demand audio content, and now focusing Matt Talk since early 2014. So those of you who like this content, like this format, like the content that we produce, it's not just me, but the 10 shows I produce. You can contribute to this network by going to matttalkonline.com/join the team. Or if you want to try something that's a one-off contribution, go to matttalkonline.com/contribute. You will be listed on the contribution page. And again, I've said this for a couple months. I've still got to get my gear ordered from Compound. Cliff Fretwell at Compound at CMP Teamwear has been a gear sponsor of this program since the get-go. And it's people like that make the job job that I'm doing here for you that much easier, because people like Cliff support wrestling. They support wrestling people, good people doing good things. So I'd like to thank Cliff and his crew at Compound. I'd like to thank you, our list of contributors that you can find again at mattalkonline.com/contribute. And I got a couple of those All-American, the Olympic level contributors going to come on that are going to be fans that we're going to talk about why they like these programs. We're going to talk about what they want to talk about. So at a certain level of perks, you get T-shirts. You can get some draft glasses, which are pretty sharp. The T-shirt, I'm actually wearing one right now, super soft feel. So that's what we got. You can contribute to this network, again, going to mattalkonline.com/join the team through Patreon, small monthly contribution, or you can go to mattalkonline.com/contribute to hit us up with a one-time contribution. That's all I've got for today, as my wife coming back into our home office to interrupt my close like always. She gives me the big thumbs up. And so that's all I got for you today. So I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me, because you've always got time. Say it with me now. For short time. I wasn't talking to you, babe. I'm just going to end the show like that, with her laughing in the background.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.